Good to see each of you here tonight. Perhaps you remember being in school, how exciting it was when you had to write a report. That's sarcasm. I didn't like that at all. Didn't like writing reports, didn't enjoy that sort of thing. It was about, as it's defined, a detailed account or statement analyzing a subject or a problem. And so you have to write about something. There's details that you have to give. You know, there's a report that we all have from the bank. There's a credit report. It includes information about pretty well everybody. And whether it's accurate or not, who knows? But it could be good or bad, depending on what you've done, depending on a lot of different factors, of course. But whether you want one or whether you don't, there's a report like that. And so, those are some things to think about. The actions that we take in this life, the things that we do, there's reports on those things. There are statements of such. And certainly when you think about that spiritually, it is the case. And, at the end, everything is going to be known. And, we're going to have an ultimate report. Sometimes we sing about something similar. There's a song, what will your answer be? Someday you'll stand at the bar on high. Someday your record you'll see. That's kind of like about a report, isn't it? There's going to be a statement of such. So tonight, if you haven't thought about it much before, there's a lot said in the scriptures about reporting in one form or another. So we're going to look at that this evening in our study. So first of all, think about will it be good or bad? Your report. It's going to be different for everybody in some way or another. Reports are not the same. You'll recall perhaps in Acts chapter 6 that when the Grecian widows were not being taken care of, the people that were chosen, the 7 men, they were men who had a good report. They were full of wisdom and full of the Spirit. And so they had an honesty about them, a good report. Some will have such a report, of course, and that's encouraging, and that was taken seriously at that time as to who was going to be selected. Cornelius, that Eddie read about for our scripture reading, was a man of good report. Let's see, Acts 10 and verse 22, a righteous and God-fearing man of good report by the entire nation of the Jews. And so that was something that was spoken about him, the kind of report that he had, what he was known for. The widows in 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 10, who could be taken into the number, had to be well reported be of good reputation, the ESV says. And so there's reports that are made in this life about spiritual things, and they can certainly be good things. And of course, we hope that is the case, right? But there can also be bad reports. It's been reported to me, Paul said about the Corinthians, from Chloe's household, that there was quarrels and contentions among you. So that had been reported to the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 11. There were some bad attitudes among the Corinthians. There were some sinful practices among the Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 1, it's actually reported that there is immorality among you, he says. There's some reporting that's been done, some talking, some notes that were recognized that had been passed to Paul. And they were not good things. They were not good reports at all. Reports can sometimes be slanderous. In Romans chapter 3 and verse 8, it was said of Paul, why not say, as we are slanderously reported, and as some affirm that we say, let us do evil, that good may come. Their condemnation is just. And so it was being reported slanderously about Paul in some things. So bad things were said about Paul, slanderous things. And so there may be such things said about us. Are they legitimate? Are they not? Those are things sometimes we don't have control over, but sometimes we do, of course. But ultimately, think about our report and whether it's going to be good or bad from the people that we know, and ultimately from God. But that brings us to our next point about what is the origin of those things. Physically, reports can come from a lot of different sources, and certainly when you're talking about your credit report, that is the case. But it's also the case in our lives, just from different people we have contact with. The things that are reported can come from a number of sources. It may be from outside sources, people who are not a part of the body of Christ. You remember that's one of the qualifications for being an elder in the church, to have a good report from those who are outside the church. And so there's a report of sorts about that, relationships that there are from those who are outside. Doesn't just apply to those who are elders. Everybody has a report of such from people that they have contact with outside of the body of Christ. What do you imagine those say? How is it that we get along with other people and the relationships that we have there? Those are good things to think about. Certainly, our brethren, we may have a report that originate from the brethren. And what would it say? Would it be something good or something bad? Acts chapter 16 and verse 2, Timothy was well reported of by the brethren in and around Lystra. So he had a good report from brethren. Demetrius in 3 John 12. Demetrius has received a good report from everyone and from the truth itself, and we also bear witness, and you know that our witness is true. So Demetrius had a good report from all men. And so brethren, of course, involved in all of that. And then, of course, from the Lord, of course, we are going to have a report. The book of life are going to contain the names of those who are faithful. Revelation 3 and verse 5, he who overcomes shall be clothed in white garments, and I will not blot his name from the book of life. So things are going to be known. Things are going to be reported about who it is we are, what we stand for, who we stand with, and eventually we're going to be judged for our record for our time here on this earth. 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 10, we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive what's due him for the things done, whether while in the body, whether good or bad. So there's going to be a judgment. We're going to be held accountable for those things. And so that's important for this conversation then about our report and what it is that we are living towards. When we think about something like your credit report, there's a basis for those things. All your transactions, your legal actions, real estate purchases, even actions your enemies may take against you legally. All of those things kind of come together to make your report. But as far as being a Christian, what is the basis for your report? How is all of that looked at? Well, certainly the things that we do, our works, is a basis for our report. That was the case with the widows there in 1 Timothy 5 that we just talked about a moment ago. They were to be those who were well reported for good works. So that's obviously something that was looked at. Our faith is something that is the basis of our report. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, of course, the first verse, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. He says, then, for by it the elders obtained a good report, or a good testimony, or they gained approval. Talking about, of course, faith, but that's pretty interesting for the introduction to chapter 11 about it being talked about, the basis of that being a report for our faith. And so that is something that is pretty relevant for us, the kind of faith that we have and how that factors into our life. That is seen by the things that we do, the actions that we take. But our report can also be factored with how others view us and the things that have gone on with that. What if someone has a grudge against you? that can be factored into our report. In Mark chapter 6 and verse 19, the story there of Herodias having a grudge against John and wanting to put him to death, but wasn't able to do so at that particular point in time. But as someone may have a grudge against you, the question isn't so much, I suppose, is if it's legitimate, but how do you handle that? What is your reaction to those things? The situation that you're put in, how do you respond to some of those things? All of that can be a factor in our report, the way that we conduct ourselves and how that is handled. So we have to be sure that we are living correctly and doing the things that are right. If someone has a grudge against us, well, we need to be handling those things correctly and in a way that is pleasing to God. Someone sinning against us could also be the basis of a report, and it could appear that way as well, because then again, what is our attitude towards that? Towards them, towards others. In Matthew chapter 5, verses 23 and 24, if you bring your gift to the altar and they remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. And so what is our attitude towards those things? And how does that factor in then with the basis of our report? Is that something that we handled correctly? Or is it something that we have mismanaged? There can also be prejudice, and that's what we see in Romans chapter 3 that we read a while ago with the Apostle Paul. He was being slanderously reported on, that he was saying that you could do evil that good may come, kind of like the end justifies the means, but that wasn't true. So that was certainly a prejudice against him. But those kinds of things can show up on us as well. What do we do with that? How do we handle ourselves in those kinds of situations? And all of that factors in to all of this with our conduct, with our behavior, not only our faith and works, but all these things that go on in our life. How do we respond to those things? How do we conduct ourselves? And of course, those can go good or bad, depending on the way that we handle that. And of course, we have to factor in then our own sins, our own sinful actions. They also greatly contribute to our report as well. And as we also talked about earlier from the Corinthians, it was being reported to the Apostle Paul about there being quarrels and contentions among them. And that was a pretty serious matter. So there was sin involved, sin going on, and it was being talked about, it was being reported, and it greatly affected a number of people. And then also the immorality in chapter 5 as well was a factor in all of that. So there's a lot of different factors to a report and what it can say, who it can be from, and a lot of different factors with all of that. How are we going to handle ourselves? How are we going to respond to all the different things that go on in our life? Say a great deal about us overall and the kind of people that we are and who it is that we are really living for and serving. And then finally tonight, thinking about then, what are the results ultimately going to be? Reports always have a purpose. With your credit report, usually you're trying to get a loan for something, and they want to know what your number is. How all these things are crunched down into a number, and that's going to determine your interest rate. It's going to determine how much money you can borrow. All of that, it's going to be a factor. If it's bad, well, you're going to be denied, or you're going to have somebody to co-sign or vouch for you, and you're going to have maybe a higher interest rate. If it's good, well, they'll let you do whatever you want pretty well within reason. But all of those things are factored in with that. But for spiritual matters, just think about how much more serious that really is. Thinking about a bad report and what that would mean. If our report is bad, with a lot of factors that go on in this life and in this world, it can really have a devastating effect on you. If you hear some bad things, or it's reported something bad about you, how do you handle that? What do you do with that? How does it affect the people around you? Those are pretty serious matters. Think about the spies in Numbers chapter 13 and 14. 12 spies sent out. What do? They come back and they give a report, right? Well, the report was pretty negative. The report was pretty bad. 10 of the 12 are saying, we can't do this. Well, think about the effect that had on everybody. I mean, chapter 14, Israel just, oh no, we can't do this. Why have you done this to us? It was a discouraging thing, terribly discouraging, and a lot of bad things resulted from that because of this bad report. Think about for ourselves. If something is bad about us, it can be a discouragement to other people. And certainly that needs to be thought of in the way that we act and conduct ourselves in this life. But at the end, if we have a bad report with the Lord at the end, just think about how terrible that is, because then it's not going to go the way that we want. Then it's a matter of not being able to go to heaven. Think about how serious that report is if it's bad. These will go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. At the end of Matthew 25. So that's pretty serious then. You don't want to have a bad report at the end. You want to be able to not be in that situation. You want to be able to handle and conduct yourself in such a way that is not the case, because the stakes are too great. It's not about not getting the loan or not getting the interest rate. It's so much greater. It's about eternity. The way we live, our faith, our works, our actions in this life, all are factored in. And if we are denied entrance into heaven at the end, we've missed out on everything. Everything is terrible then for us, because our life will have been lived in such a way as to not meet that ultimate goal. On the other hand, a good report is a great thing. In this life, if good things are said about you, if people get a good report about you in one way or another, it's a source of encouragement. It's a source of strength and comfort. How many of you like to hear good things about other people? I know we live in a society that kind of goes so much on the negative, but it's encouraging to hear good things about people, especially your brethren, people that you know well, and what a source of encouragement that really is when others are trying to do the things that are right, whenever they're willing to do what it takes to do the right thing. Now that's a great source of strength and encouragement. If you look over in Philippians chapter 4, Philippians 4, verses 8 and 9, when Paul says in verse 8, finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good report, if there's any excellence, if anything worthy of praise, let your mind dwell on these things. The things you've learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace shall be with you. That's always been such a great passage of encouragement. But, think on those things that are of good report. Think of those things that are an encouragement. And then Paul, of course, uses himself as an example there, not for pride or arrogance, but just the fact of him striving to do what is right. The things you've learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things. And so it is a source of encouragement and strength and comfort, those things that are of good report. And that good report can also be a blessing to others. And that's an encouragement to them also. But most importantly, at the end, if we have a good report with the Lord, that means everything. That means we're going to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. That means that all of our hopes and desires and the life that we've been living is going to be seen at the end as what we've been aiming for, the opening of the gates of heaven for us that we've been looking forward to. And that's such an encouragement to think about, living the life that we have been for that very purpose. And so in closing this evening, it's also encouraging to think about that, in the final report, there's not going to be any mistakes that are made. When you hear good or bad things in this physical world, there's a lot of problems sometimes, and the slanderous reporting that was made against Paul, a lot of things like that go on in this world. But when we're talking about our relationship with the Lord and whether or not we're going to go to heaven or not, there's not going to be any mistakes there. It's not going to be subject to he said, she said, anything like that. There's not going to be any errors, because all is going to be accurate. All is going to be revealed, and it's all going to be without any errors or mistakes. And so that is a source of comfort, knowing who it is that we are living towards, who it is that's going to be judging us, and that our soul is in his hands should give us a source of comfort. But all the more when we think about all of these different factors in our life, I hope it makes us consider then all the more our actions, the influence that we have, both to the good and the bad, the attitudes that we portray in this life, how that affects ourselves, how it affects other people, the importance of our teaching and our beliefs. What is it that we stand for? What is it that we are opposed? How is all that factored in with our brethren and factored in with what God actually says? And then really thinking about what it is we teach, the influence we have with all of those from day to day. All of that has an effect on the people around us. It has an effect on our overall report for what the Lord thinks, and it is something that we need to be very much aware of. Because after all, at the end, as Revelation 20 and verse 15 talks about, anyone not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. We want to have our names in the book of life. It's not just going to show up there accidentally. It's going to be because we mean it to be there. We want it to be there. We're living in such a way as to please the Lord. And he desires that for us. He doesn't want to remove our name. He wants our name to be there. He wants us to be successful. But it does make a difference, the things that we believe, the things that we teach, and the way that we live our life in this world. Tonight, if your life is not right with the Lord, you have the opportunity to change that. If you're not a part of his family, understand how serious that is, that your name is not in the book of life. And what that means, it means that you will not be there with the Lord in the end. And how serious that separation is, because it's not just for a little while, it's for eternity. If you are a Christian but have not been living the right kind of life, that means your name was in the book of life, but it's not now. And that's pretty serious to think about. But the Lord doesn't want you to stay there. He wants to put your name back there. But you have the ability to make that known and to make that right with the Lord. If we can help you tonight anyway, we'd like to do that. Let it be known by coming forward so that we stand and sing.
Someday you'll stand at the bar on high. Someday your record you'll